I was listening this week to a commentator on a news program who said, we have a daily show commenting on current events, and that no longer seems like enough because events are happening so fast that it's impossible to keep up. It's overwhelming to deal with the news that bombards us each and every day. Just in this past week, we had yet another assassination attempt on President Trump, and we had an amazing story, I don't know if you caught this, about pagers and walkie-talkies exploding in Lebanon. Apparently the Israeli intelligence service figured out a way to implant explosives into pagers and walkie-talkies that Hezbollah, the group that's been lobbing missiles into Israel, use instead of cell phones, because they were worried cell phones could be hacked, so they're using these cell phones, these walkie-talkies and pagers. Well, the Israeli intelligence service had this whole scheme where they manufactured these things, put explosives into them, then they sent a message last week that it caused all of these to explode, killing a number of people, wounding others. And I'm like, I don't even know what to think about all this. I don't know how to react. One event happens, and I'm still trying to process that, and then 10 other things happen, and it's very challenging to know how to stay grounded in the midst of what feels like so much chaos. I don't know if that's something you can relate to. One of the questions I have is, where do we find real wisdom in a time when we are so bombarded and overloaded with so much news and information? Where does true wisdom come from? Father John wrote a beautiful fractal about that. It's in the back of your bulletin, and it's also online. I encourage you to read it. One of the things that he mentions in there, and that I found also as I was reading these scriptures, is that of course as Christians, the very first place we look to for wisdom, for real wisdom, is the scriptures, the Holy Bible. We look to the Bible as the source of our understanding about God and the world and ourselves and our relationships. And it's very interesting to me that all 4 of our lessons today are really about what that wisdom is all about. We start with Proverbs, a book that is all about wisdom, in which wisdom is personified as the female part of God. But clearly this chapter was not written by a woman. It was written by a man, sort of mansplaining what the ideal woman is, right? It says a capable wife. Better translation is a woman of valor, the ideal woman. And it's a guy's version of what this ideal woman. I was picturing in my mind, what would be the alternative version of this? What would a woman say is the capable husband? What would those attributes be? Would it be maybe, like shopping and cooking once in a while, folding the laundry, changing diapers? Like, what would be the capable husband if wisdom were to offer that side of the equation? At any rate, this whole chapter is designed to help us to see what a wise person in that day and age might look like. What kind of qualities would they have? They could manage life in a very capable way. They didn't get ruffled. They were generous. They cared about other people. They ran things well. It feels quite contemporary in some ways when we think about that kind of wisdom. In the letter of James, we were talking in our Bible study group, the letter of James feels in some ways like the book of Proverbs. It's lots of advice, very practical advice about how to live a wise and grounded life. And James is offering really an essay on what makes the difference between a foolish person and a wise person. The foolish person is controlled by their appetites, by their cravings. They don't respond out of wisdom, but they are always reacting out of their own selfish desires. Bitter envy and selfish ambition are the hallmarks of the foolish person. And boy, we see a lot of that in our world today. Lots of bitter envy and selfish ambition. All this activity that's coming out of these cravings, selfishness. Just driving on the road, you see it operating all the time. I'm gonna cut you off and gain 2 seconds. I've done the math. Okay? If you drive like a maniac on a typical drive, right? Most of us drive about 15 minutes to a half an hour is a typical trip, right? So let's say you drive the speed limit, and let's say you drive like an absolute maniac and put your life and all of our lives at risk. How much time do you actually gain? Have you done the math? You gain about 28 seconds on average by driving like a maniac, right? What is it gaining you? I think this is James's point. What is it really gaining you to operate in this terribly selfish way? In fact, it's causing all manner of conflicts, all these conflicts and disputes, all this violence, all of this acting out is really because you have lost your sense of groundedness. You've forgotten who you are, and you're only operating out of a desire. I think of it as comparison. A psychologist once said, the root of all unhappiness is comparison. Right? You look at someone else and go, why don't I have what they have? They look better than I do. They've got a better job. They got more money. They got a nicer car. They got the promotion. I didn't get the promotion. All of that comparison leads us to terrible unhappiness. Instead, wisdom comes not from looking out at other people, but from looking within, finding within ourselves the still small voice of God, who reminds us that we are made in the image of God, that we are precious in God's sight, that we have and are everything that we need to be. And then our whole goal should be to live into our identity, not to try to copy or mimic or outdo someone else's. Jesus makes this point extremely clearly. It's a very humorous moment. He's been teaching his disciples about this. He's like, look, guys, the path of God is a path of self-sacrifice. In fact, I'm here as the Son of God, right? I'm here as the Son of God not to gain power and earthly glory, but instead to give it all away. I'm going to walk willingly into my future, which involves being arrested, betrayed, being crucified, executed in a horrible way, so that God can raise me on the third day and accomplish the salvation of the world. If you're going to follow me, I just want you to know that's what you're signing up for. And he's like, do you get all this? And they're like, no. What were you talking about, he said, on the road when we were walking together? What were you guys talking about? Were you talking about how wonderful it is to follow Jesus in the path of self-denial and sacrifice? No. What were they talking about? Which one of us is the greatest? Who's going to get the most power, prestige, and in this coming kingdom, right? They have totally missed the point. They're looking at each other as rivals instead of as fellow servants of God. They're not looking inside, they're looking outside with envy, bitter envy, and selfish ambition. Even the disciples, which should give us some comfort, because this is a struggle that we are all engaged in, to tamp down those voices in our head which cause us to want so much, those cravings, that desire to be seen and heard. At breakfast, Father John and I were talking about one of the greatest things in life is to truly have someone with their full attention listen to you, look at you, see you, appreciate you, and really hear what you're saying. It's actually very rare. I have to say, in my own marriage, we're so busy rushing here and there, we don't take a lot of time for those types of conversations. I try to do it in pastoral care visits, but so often my mind is racing with the 10 other things I have to do next that it's very hard to really slow down and focus. Jesus, to make his point, used a physical example. He took a small child and put it in the midst of the disciples and said, look, this is what I'm talking about. If you want to follow me, you need to be like this child. You need to be vulnerable. You need to be powerless. You need to know that all that you are and have and need comes from God. That's the only way that you're going to truly be able to follow. Or in our psalm today, the psalmist talks about what distinguishes a righteous person, someone who has wisdom. It is that they are like a tree planted by a stream of water. Not a tumbleweed, which has no roots and the wind blows it away, but an oak with deep roots that soak up the nourishment that God gives and have the resilience to handle the winds and storms of life. We are facing lots of winds and storms in the world today. We're facing conflicts of all kinds, bombardment, especially during the political season, bombardment of information and opinions, people telling us what we should think and what we should believe, who we should vote for, and all this stuff. And how are we to find wisdom? I believe it is only when we can silence some of those voices. Turn off the television, the talk radio. Take time in silence, in stillness, to listen for the voice of God. Because as important as it is to listen to one another, to truly hear each other and see each other, appreciate each other and know each other, how much more important is it to take the time to listen to God? It's hard to hear God's voice sometimes. It takes practice. It takes stillness. It takes the ability to tune out those other voices and to find stillness. My prescription for you all, for all of us, is that somehow we carve out, we seek out moments where we can have that silence, that stillness. Every Saturday, there's a centering prayer group which practices that here. But wherever you do it, whether it's on walking the dog or in your car, instead of yelling at the idiot drivers in front and behind you, try to tune that out and take those moments for stillness and listening to the voice of God. I believe that is what truly produces wisdom. The wisdom that equips us to operate in this world as people of kindness, of generosity, speaking the truth in love, sharing with one another the wonderful good news that God has given us everything we need, that God has blessed us abundantly, that God has given us in His Son Jesus Christ forgiveness of all of our sins and the ability through the Holy Spirit to manifest God's glory in this dark and turbulent world. May we have that wisdom this fall